And welcome. We are virtually connecting from eCampus Ontario TESS, Technology Enabled Seminar and Showcase. And we've got Robin DeRosa. We've also got Terry Green and little Hattie, who you'll see in a moment. There, she's kind of on the bottom of the screen. There we go. But I'm going to start by introducing the virtual folks, and then we'll go to the on-site folks. So I'm Christina Hendricks. I teach philosophy at the University of British Columbia in Vancouver. And I'll start with Verena to introduce yourself.
Hi, I'm Verena Roberts. I'm coming from Calgary, Alberta, from the University of Calgary, Workland School of Education, and I'm a Learning Sciences candidacy student.
And Tracy.
Hi, I'm Tracy Mullins. I'm in Toronto, and I work for an organization called Alpha Plus, which and we work with programs in the literacy and basic skills programs in colleges, school boards, and community-based programs around integrating technology into their practice.
Great, thank you. Rosemary. Oh, Rosemary, I think you're muted. There you go.
There we go. Thank you. I teach as an adjunct business professor in the faculties of business for, I've taught for U of T, for Ryerson, for Guelph Humber, Sheridan College, George Brown College, Centennial College. So interested in the business aspects of how we make open education work.
Thanks. And Peter.
Hi, I'm Peter Wolf, and I'm an independent higher education consultant who's very interested in open education and technology enhanced learning.
Welcome. And Julia.
Hi, I'm Julia Berg. I'm an instructional design consultant for Ryerson University and previously also for Seneca, Durham, Lambton, Canadore. So I've been able to see online learning applied in a variety of situations. I'm interested in the applications of open education and open educational resources.
Great, thanks. So on site, we have Robin DeRosa and Terry and Hattie.
Go ahead, Terry. Say hi. Hi, I'm Terry Green. I'm a program manager with eCampus Ontario, and I am here to watch Robin keynote. It was wonderful.
There's this incredible room with this beautiful view, and then there's a baby, and I don't know if anyone heard anything I said because of the view and the baby, but Hattie is fantastic. So I'm Robin DeRosa, and I teach at Plymouth State University, which is in New Hampshire, but we're on site here in Toronto and also in the room, and they hide because they're official, but we've got, where are you? There you go, Ellen.
Hi. I'm on-site Betty.
And Lena.
Hi, everyone.
See, they won't even, that's all they'll say, right? But we're happy to be here. We just finished the keynote. Now there's some panels going on, and we are in a little room that looks out over the water, and that's really lovely. So,
excellent. So I thought we'd just start by having you give us, Robin, a little bit of a rundown of what you said in your keynote, since the people here were not able to see it. And I know you said you had a new title, but of course it's early in the morning here and I didn't look it up, so.
Yeah, and I don't even know, they ask you for a title and you give them a title and then you write the thing and you're like, oh, so, so I don't know what they thought. I can't even remember what they thought the title was, but I changed it to basically be a human framework for innovation. So really what I was talking about, and it is, the transcript is posted online on my website, so you can read it. I think there's a recording too that is coming. It will be released. So you'll be, I know, waiting on the edge of your seat for that. But the basic premise was that we want to start with the humanity of our learners and try to bend our institutions to accommodate the real lives of the humans who inhabit our institutions. And instead, we tend to, especially with innovation, we tend to start with kind of a solutionism. So we look at outputs And when we talk about solving problems, we talk about the kind of outputs that we want. And so we end up trying to use certain things in order to get certain kinds of outputs generated. And I was kind of arguing instead that let's talk about the work and practice that humans do and the things we need to learn. And then let's bend our institutions around those practices, because if we do that, we'll likely sort of magnify impact, but also accommodate humanity. And we started with a little exercise where I asked people to raise their hands if they are, you know, they picked a sort of person in their head. And then I asked them to raise their hands if that person had experienced, for example, a death in the family over the last 4 years, or an issue with mental illness, or changed their mind about a career path. And I had a whole list of things. And I knew that lots of people were going to put their hands up, but actually at the end, I don't think there was a hand down. So the lesson there was kind of that, you know, the roadblocks or challenges to learning are actually normal. Like, that's what it looks like to live a normal life. So why do our institutions treat those as exceptional or problematic things, as opposed to leveraging those things as part of the learning process? So what would it look like to design around that was kind of what I was talking about. That
sounds amazing. I can't wait to read the transcript. We were chatting.
You know, it was literally amazing. No, just kidding. But I think, you know, to a certain degree, you preach to the choir when you come to places like this, because the leadership at eCampus Ontario is so focused on human-centered design. And I just came out of a student panel where the students were taking the lead on kind of designing solutions for their institutions. The one I heard was a project about designing mental health solutions, and that the students were talking about, like, what were the real issues that they were finding that students were experiencing. But I think so on the one hand, you're sort of preaching to the choir, but on the other hand, it's really important that we kind of come together and just support each other in this vision, because as much as I don't think it was a new idea to people, it's our daily lives are, you know, inside of the work that we do in higher ed, we're just constantly faced with pressure to scale, with pressure to kind of deliver a solution quickly, to find the right product to buy, to give to make the problem go away. And so you kind of have to keep reminding each other that we're being sold the terms of a debate that are, you know, out of whack, I think.
I'm going to jump in, because the one thing that I really pulled from this talk was the face of the student. And Robin embedded throughout the presentation this morning the actual face of individual students that made a difference in your thinking. And really, I think that impacted the audience more, because we all saw the face of individual students that we teach or that we have had contact with. So it made it very real for me. And I know the few people that I was talking to afterwards, it made it so real for them. And I think that we tend to forget that when we're building the syllabi and building the course content and structuring the LMS, and we forget that there are people coming into that space with us. And I think that was so real this morning.
Yeah, so I'll just follow up on that. I didn't talk about this during the keynote because like, crying is not a centrally attractive quality in a keynoter. But the keynote began with a conversation about Tiffany Richards, who's one of my students that really helped me change my practice because she was struggling with cancer. And as I worked with her on quote unquote accommodations for her illness, I realized that a lot of the things she was teaching me, I could actually do in program design as opposed to in individual accommodations. So we changed a lot of practices in our program. And so Tiffany passed away just about a month, maybe 2 months ago now, maybe even longer. I can't the time is blurring together. But she's had a super profound impact on me, but also just like the practices of our program. And a bunch of students who came after her who never met her have already benefited from the way we changed things up because of her, what she taught me, which was really about, it's not just a kind of access issue where you can offer more flexibility to accommodate that individual student, but that when you redesign how curriculum can accommodate life, you actually get better contributions to the knowledge commons as well. So when she was able to take some of the credits that she'd done in nursing, and she was never going to be able to be a nurse because of this brain tumor that she had, was affecting her short-term memory. But when she transformed that work into the work that she started to do in social work and patient advocacy, we actually got some really important work in patient advocacy from the perspective of a student who was seriously ill, dealing with her care. A similar thing I talked about was at a program down in Rhode Island at College Unbound, where a student who found a very accommodating, flexible program that dealt with food insecurity and childcare and all sorts of things to help him come back to college after being away for a long time, also empowered him to do this research project on diabetes care in communities of color, which is very under-researched in the academy. And part of the reason is that we don't make structures that allow for vulnerable and marginalized learners to come in and do research. So when we do, we make things better for those students, but we also like get better quality and interesting work. So that was Tiffany's story. I didn't talk about her passing away recently because that's just sad, really, really sad. But she got her degree just before she died, and was absolutely thrilled to have a new path and a new passion, and it was meaningful. Yeah. Sorry.
That's okay. No, that must be really, really tough. And it, as you were speaking, I was thinking about just being a faculty member and how the way we talk about students who are going through life, as you put it, just the basic realities of life tend to be treated as exceptions, right? So, well, everybody's got, this deadline, but then there's a few who get the exception, right? So it's interesting to reframe it. I like how you were talking about everybody raising their hand, because we're all exceptions in a way, right? So then there are no exceptions, right? So let me just open it up to questions from others in the room, in the virtual room. So if you'd like to speak, just unmute.
Go ahead.
I had a question. So in hearing you speak about designing for the diversity of students and diversity of learners, I was introduced to this in a very clear way with Universal Design for Learning. And when I was presented with this, it was like, this just makes sense. Why are we thinking about accommodations as an afterthought? Why aren't we designing with them in mind and enhancing it for all of the students involved? And so with my kind of design cap on, I was wondering if you could speak a little bit more to the practical applications. What does this really look like, either in your face-to-face classroom or in your online classroom, to bring in those ideas?
Yeah, sure. And a lot of this is so affected by people who are accessibility advocates, particularly for me, Tara Robertson, who, as I learned more about accessibility, but also about the kind of ridiculously individualized ways we were accommodating students, it just seemed like if we put access at the front, we would solve these problems more efficiently, but also it would define an ecosystem rather than a solution, which is kind of a big part of what I was talking about. So the first thing I try to do is the word for me is access, and that's kind of a double-edged access to knowledge and access to knowledge creation. So getting students into the room and then empowering them to contribute to the commons. And I try when I plan or do anything to say, how can I get more people into the room and how can I empower them more effectively? So that has created a whole series of things in my program. Some larger ones maybe are that we've moved to what we call in our program a green light grading process. And so there's for any assignment or thing that, so first of all, I changed all of our program to pass, no pass model. There's some pros and cons to the pass, no pass model. One of the big cons is that I work with a lot of students who have previously failed out of a lot of courses or opportunities in their learning. And when they start to excel, they would have liked to get some A's and I would have liked to give them to them. But it's worth it for the tone and the ethos of the program, which is very focused on sort of collegial feedback rather than a kind of punitive grading model. But the green light grading is basically every assignment or thing that you do is either green lighted or not green lighted yet. So there's no not passed, there's just not passed yet. And we use as a baseline for green lighting the question of whether this piece is ready to share. So something's ready to share. It may, for example, be like a totally A+ piece, but like I had a student who wrote this amazing response to something that scholar Gardner Campbell had written. But in the piece, the student had called Gardner Campbell Campbell Gardner. So even though it was like totally A+ work, I wasn't going to share that. Like it would be super embarrassing to the student, right? They wouldn't want that shared. So it was not green lighted. So it really shifts everything about what counts as quality work when you use the question of like, does this really help the student, the commons, the field, if we put this out there? And that also allows for kind of a flexible, slightly go as you want kind of pace. I don't want to say that there aren't lots of challenges for instructors, particularly for contingent faculty. I also do a thing where like you don't even fail the course, like it's just not green lighted yet, take an incomplete, you know. There's a lot of privilege I enjoy through my position that allows me to spend more time, you know, following up on this kind of grading model or even letting the grading model carry over past the course. But green light grading has been a part of that. Then there's other things that we do too, for everything from our departmental food pantry, which is really as much symbolic as anything, so that when students come in, we talk to them about if at some point you cannot pay your rent, you cannot eat, you've got a childcare emergency, like these are academic issues for us, and it's our job as a program, not just as a school, but as an individual academic program to solve these with and for you. So we've created lots of peer-to-peer systems for transportation emergencies and childcare emergencies, veteran support, all of those access issues that prevent the sort of coming to the table to learn. When we're building our materials, that now I'm working really hard on accessible design, where I had a huge learning curve. So that's kind of my newest thing, and it's really changed how I do keynotes over the last month, since Jess Mitchell has been helping me kind of redesign what I present, but because of that, it's redesigned kind of like how I put the talks together. So now the talks are like coming out really different than they were before. So I think I can't really think of any aspect of my practice that isn't touched by putting accessibility at the front. And I don't really find it overwhelming. I mean, I mess up all the time. Like most things are not fully accessible, but I don't find it difficult anymore to put that at the front. That's like the norm for how we approach things. And I think it's been, the biggest thing I think is just that the students see it. And so especially like with some of the childcare stuff we've done, in my opinion, it's been really small. It hasn't been as effective. I mean, I'd like to have like a daycare, you know, and I can't do it. But the students who are raising young children, especially single parents, they really see the program making these efforts and they respond and they post things like, my program, you know, cares about blah, 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 blah. And that's already made a big difference. Just the sense that they don't feel like they're going to be penalized for the challenges that they're going to face, no doubt. You're trying to raise a little kid as they're sometimes doing school full time. So yeah, I think grading practices in the curriculum and the accessibility builds with our, trying to work on our textbook and our video and the way I lecture and teach, always having kind of multimodal stuff going on. But also with those accessibility programs related to just getting into the room in the first place, which we usually faculty, we don't see that as something we need to care about. It's like for other people. So.
Thank you.
Thank you. I think Peter's raised his hand.
Can I follow up on that? One of the things I noticed in what you were talking about is you weren't talking about necessarily individual course interventions. You were really talking about having a much broader perspective of the program. And I think that that's a really important point for us to think about as people who try to enable those kinds of opportunities, is that quite often we're focused on an individual faculty member, an individual topic, an individual course. And we're missing a lot of what we've hidden within the curriculum by having such a narrow perspective. And so I think part and parcel of what you were talking about is the importance that raising our vision to another scale.
Yeah, and I think that's exactly right, because so when you think about like human-centered design, which is what I'm advocating and the eCampus Ontario is very big on, you're thinking about humans, and we tend to individualize that conversation a lot. But what I'm interested in is, could we think about human-centered design at an institutional level? So I'm just like so tired of the demands put on human beings to shape themselves into institutions. And instead, I'd like to see institutions start changing their structures to accommodate the actual humans who populate it. So that's a very tricky little dance when you're working with individuals and you want so much to respect their humanity that the tendency is to give them what they need in a very specific context. But I actually think we're better served by, sure, doing that. You know, this is like Sarah Goldberg-Grab's FAST Fund. Like, sure, give that student $200, 100%, like let them stay in. But then you've got to scale back and say, if this student needed $200 to do ABC, that's also a structural problem. So now I need to solve that one, because if I just keep giving $200 to individual students, we are going to run out of dollars. You know, it's going to be a problem. So always trying to step back and ask the institution, yeah, well, what are you going to do? Like, you know, the student is doing everything. Now, what are you going to do to respond? I think that's a great point.
And Robin, can I ask you a bit about what I'm really hearing is the development of relationships, and how do we better develop those relationships? Because regardless of whatever we're talking about, you need to have a relationship with that student in order to support them, but also to support them throughout, as we're saying, throughout all their courses or throughout. So in higher ed, how can we better support relationships? And I also heard that cost part, and thinking about when we have criticisms of OER focused on cost. What I really think you're talking about here is like an open pedagogical approach, and that you want to think about access to the person, to the individual, and increasing interactions and getting to know them better. So maybe could you speak a little bit about that? Like, how do we build relationships? Like that formative assessment, I don't know, like practical ideas as well as big ideas.
Yeah, I think you're exactly right. And so much of what I was talking about today was trying to move from a focus on problems to a focus on communities, and to say that, like, particularly as we try to scale things that work, that if we focus only on those outputs and not on the infrastructure of people where the work happens, we're going to be in big trouble. And I think we are, because of that exact problem. So the question of sort of like, how you build relationships is always funny to me, because the biggest thing I think is that our institutions are built to kind of corrupt them. So a lot of the work that I do in our program is about trying to stop the institution from stopping humans from connecting with each other. Case in point, you know, I mean, this will surprise absolutely none of you, but is all of the sort of plagiarism monitoring. When I was in college, there was a dorm. It was built in the 70s, and at my university in the 60s, there had been a lot of protests. And so this dorm that was built in the 70s was built to keep students from protesting. So what would happen is you'd be in this huge dorm with tons of other students, but you would never see any of them. Everything had these, like, if you looked out the window, there were concrete blinders on either side of you, so you couldn't see out the windows. You'd have these, you know, so it's very dystopian. But it's also a good metaphor for kind of the way we try to sort of surveil, punish, pull apart. Another example is just like a student was posting in our Facebook group the other day and was like, oh my God, I was just in a class where students were using a Google Doc to take group notes, and like it changed my life, and also like don't tell the teacher, and you know, but this sense of trying that students, I think everybody by nature, we're social people. I'm actually just reading Joshua Eiler's book right now called How Humans Learn, and chapter 1 is all about curiosity, so good. Chapter 2 is all about kind of the innately scientific and biological components of social learning. And I think we don't have to work all that hard to help people communicate, work together, trust each other. What we have to do is look at the places where the institution is pulling that stuff apart. And I think competition is a big part of that. So we say we build these collaborative environments, but everything rotates around these competitive structures. So for us, by taking those grades out a little bit, that was helpful. But also in terms of like, I've been really working in my institution to stop talking about competitor institutions and to talk about collaborator institutions when we're battling each other for enrollments. We've kind of just got this corrupt notion that our strength in education is going to be proprietary. But of course, the whole point of open is that we're going to get our strength by more radical sharing. So I think helping students understand the more you collaborate, the better. So if we need to sort of explicitly talk about how this is a shift from a model where that used to be called cheating, the idea of succeeding like just on your own, the idea of filling a gap in your knowledge by asking someone else to help you, like that's going to be now considered a strength of you as a learner rather than a weakness. I find that most students used to know how to do that. And then through their schooling, they've been schooled into a kind of compliance model that really segregates all of that stuff. So it's really a question of unlearning the bad institutional habits more than teaching them something brand new. And mostly my students are just surprised that it's legal, you know, to do the things that I'm encouraging them to do, true collaboration. The other thing I think is, you know, I'm guilty myself, I think partially coming out of an R1 environment that was so competitive where like my advisors didn't even want to write recommendations for me to go to a teaching centered institution to work. That we think of research as a singular, alone kind of experience. And coming into open has totally blown my mind about like working truly collaboratively with other people and how that strengthens the work that I do, the outputs. So modeling that for students, like showing them my community and showing them what it looks like on a daily practice to be talking outside of my, immediate group, I think is helpful. And I really think that when students sense that you care about not just their reception of the content, but about what they've got to contribute, they automatically start engaging in a relationship with you, right? That's so different than a model that's based only on the content of what they're expected to download. So I haven't found it hard once I changed up my syllabus. The students didn't need to change all that much, I don't think. I know some people have a harder time. I've definitely had lots of colleagues when they first, you too, Verena, I'm sure, have had people come to you and say, like, I tried doing this and the students hate it and they just want to know the answer. And, but I usually see, like, when you get that kind of pushback from students, that's indication of that compliance model that they are so good at. And I don't see that as, like, when they push back that way, I'm like, of course you're pushing back on that because you've been very successful in this compliance model. And it's more indication of why we need to change it up a little bit.
Okay, so it's about, well, I don't know what time it is there, 11?
Yeah. Oh.
It's been about 30 minutes, and I would love to keep going, but I actually have to go to work. It's 8 o'clock here in Vancouver. I have to get my son to school. I have to head to work. So maybe one last thought from anybody on site or virtual?
I have a question, if I may. It's Rosemary. In the business faculties in Canada, we tend to teach the team model and the importance of people choosing a team, working together, understanding what their respective weaknesses and strengths are, and collaborating to deliver a joint project. Because when you go to the business world, that's what you're going to have to do. That's what's expected of you. I wondered how much team exercise has been part of your curriculum development, Robin.
Yeah, I think I can answer that really fast to say a lot. And the biggest change I made since coming to Open was to make it not fake, so no team exercises, because, and that's, depending on how, the overtones of that word. But I think I used to have a lot of like, here's where you'll pretend to be in a team kind of teamwork. And now I tend to say, like, okay, we authentically need to do something in a team, and that's why you're in a team. And I get way less crap than I used to about group work when they've all got important roles to play in order to do a certain thing that they recognize as important. So my biggest recommendation with the team stuff is just not to make it about hoop jumping or about training for teamwork, but to actually run teams and do teamwork. And I think that's kind of an ethos that we all understand in Open. But when you think back to before you learned about Open, it's like amazing how much at least for myself, that I used to do that really was a little bit inauthentic. And it wasn't surprising that the students used to grumble about that kind of work. I think Terry might have a quick last comment. Maybe it's Hattie. I don't know which one.
Might be Hattie. I just want to say, because you wove the stories of your students through, and we saw the pictures, it culminated so perfectly with a slide of all the pictures of all four of them. Hey, shush. And with it said, how beautiful would it be if our humanity, oh, you're ruining the moment.
No, that's the whole point.
That's the humanity.
How beautiful would it be if our humanity wasn't an impediment to our learning, but its heartbeat? And you could have just dropped the mic and took off.
Nothing is more perfect than ending with a crying baby, for my point, right?
And on that note, Christina, thank you so much for being the virtual buddy on your end. And
Sure.
thanks everybody for joining us this morning. We've got one last session this afternoon with the students who are part of the student
SXD Lab.
SXD Lab. So they'll be here this afternoon with Terry and Hattie. So come on back and join for some more fun to learn about the student perspective.
And I think Greg's going to be our virtual buddy.
The virtual buddy for that one. So
yeah.
Yes, thank
I'm
you
excited
guys
for
so
that.
much.
Okay. Thanks so much for joining us, everybody.
Thanks.
Stopping the broadcast.